let me take you to Parliament. We'll talk about some money there. Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Abebrese says the economy is on a quicker pace to recovery than previously anticipated as he requests parliamentary approval of 27.4 billion cedis for the first quarter of 2021.
Mr. Speaker, the robustness of our macroeconomic fundamentals and the efficacy of government's COVID mitigation measures have been borne out by recent indicators. According to the Bank of Ghana's survey in August 2020, consumer confidence is bouncing back strongly and is currently above pre-COVID-19 loan levels. Business confidence has also increased, although below pre-lockdown levels. About 95% of the surveyed showed strong optimism, reflecting the improving macroeconomic conditions, stability in the exchange rate, lower input prices in lending rates, and positive industry prospects. Accordingly, the projected growth rate 2020 reported in July has been revised from 0.9% to 1.9% to reflect these dynamics. As the Bank of Ghana stated, the green shoot of rebounding economic activity are clearly with us. We must be thankful to God for these encouraging developments. Another assessments provoke a degree of optimism and reveals that bold and effective measures implemented by government have been key in quickening the pace of economic recovery. This is the competent leadership we promised under President Akufo-Addo. Indeed, the President's decisive and compassionate leadership in these challenging times internationally acknowledged and has added to our reputation as a black star of Africa. Mr. Speaker, our efforts to protect lives and preserve lives, coupled with the impact of the pandemic on revenues and expenditures, resulted in fiscal deficit of 11.4% of GDP. Already indicated in the presentation to this August House in July, we have a well-thought-out Ghana Cares for our Tampa plan and strategy to return this economy to a more sustainable fiscal path in the medium term. Mr. Speaker, the 2020 fiscal framework, which increased the fiscal deficit from 4.7% of GDP to 4% in the 2020 mid-year review. The fiscal operations of the economy for the January to September 2020 period show that on provisional basis, both revenues and expenditures exceeded their respective targets, resulting in the fiscal deficit of 9% of GDP against a program deficit of 8.9% of GDP. More specifically, total revenues and grant period, which totaled 36.7 billion Ghana cedis, exceeded the target of 35.7 billion Ghana cedis by 972.7 million Ghana cedis.
National Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Abebrese there in Parliament a short while ago. Our correspondent for Parliamentary Affairs, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, is on the ground for us. We'll cross over to him right now. Hello, Joseph. Joseph, let's start talking. Right, good afternoon. Let's start talking about the significance of this amount.
So, the Finance Minister has been giving a breakdown of what this 27.43 billion Ghana cedis will be spent on in the first quarter of 2021. Let me just go through that briefly. An amount of 7.7 billion Ghana cedis will be spent on compensation for employees, mainly within the public sector. An amount of 1.5 billion Ghana cedis will be spent on goods and services. So that's also money that will help run the various machinery when it comes to government and ministries, departments, and agencies, and all in terms of getting stationery and all transportation and all other things. Another amount of 7 billion Ghana cedis, and that's where the controversy is. I'll get back to that in a while. An amount of 7 billion Ghana cedis of the 27.4 billion cedis will be spent on the payment of interest on various loans that government has taken. There will be subsidies that will be provided. We are getting the full details of what subsidies there will be, but an amount of 259 million cedis will be spent on subsidies. There will be grants to various government units to the tune of 4.3 billion. Government says they will give social benefits to the tune of 41 million Ghana cedis. There will be other expenditure to the 813 billion cities, an amount of 9
Joseph,
billion Ghana cedis
I'm losing you. I'm losing you, Joseph. I think I got you up to the point where you say 4.3 billion will be given out as grants.
Correct, to various other government agencies, the minister said, and another 41 million will go into social benefits. There will be other expenditure to the tune of 813 million Ghana cedis, and then there will be capital expenditure, which is expected to go into infrastructure and all, to the tune of 1.9 billion Ghana cedis, and all of that will amount to around 23 billion. And then government says they will clear various arrears to the tune of 350 million, and another amount of 3.4 billion cedis will go into the amortization of various loans. So that's the breakdown. And the significance of this is, as you were asking earlier, when the finance minister came to Parliament for approval of monies to be spent throughout the year 2020 that we find ourselves in currently, he asked for 98 billion, and then subsequently he came to request for an additional 11 billion. So the entire budget for the year 2020 is hovering around 109 towards 110 billion Ghana cedis. Now, if you stick with that for the mathematics, this figure, which has been requested for the first quarter, around 27 billion, virtually sits in, it's just as the 2020 figure, looking at the fact that it's just more like 25% of it. But the minority has actually been raising concerns about this. They think that a lot of the 27 billion going into the payment of loans and all shows that the economy is broke, and it's an indication that the economy is not on a sound footing as has been assured by the finance minister. But before we get into the general reaction that the minority has been given, let me just quickly run you through some other highlights of the minister's address to Parliament.
Please go ahead.
A few hours ago. It was actually an address which lasted for about 45 minutes, although he came in a little late. He made a point that macro stability as far as the economy is concerned has been restored over the last 4 years. Ghana is currently exporting food under the Planting for Food and Jobs program. He said that 1.2 million young people are in senior high school currently free of charge because of the free senior high school program. He spoke of how Ghana has exited the IMF program, although the previous administration did not run the economy well. He went on to make the point that there's been the protection of depositors and investors as far as the banking sector is concerned. More than 15 billion has been spent on various government flagship programs. Teacher and nursing allowance have been restored. The tax burden has been reduced. The fight against COVID has been successful thus far. And then he made the points that you made earlier about the fact that the economy appears to be on a quicker pace to recovery. He cited some statistics. For example, there was the projection that because of the impact of COVID, Ghana's GDP growth this year will hover around 0.9%. That figure has been revised upwards to 1%. So a 0.1% upward revision of that. It's not just that. The nation's fiscal deficit, which is the amount we spend compared to how much revenue we gain, because of COVID, it was expected that to be around 9.9%. But the minister says for the year 2020, the projection is that it will come down to 8.3%. Another indication that he says shows that the economy is actually doing far better. So those have been some of the details. He indicated that the government will be going onto the sovereign market to actually raise $3 billion to help cover the budget going into the 2021 year. And then he went on to say that you look at the expected expenditure of 27 billion, revenue will be able to bring in about 17 billion of that, and then there will be a deficit of about 10 billion which government has to find from elsewhere. So those have been some of the issues that the minister has actually been telling MPs about.
Well, Joseph, hold on for me. We'll come back to the responses or the reactions that we've had from the minority. Of course, we know what to expect, but we'll break it down a little bit further for our viewers. And I want you to hang on for me. Let me introduce one of my resource persons on this conversation, Dr. Grace Ofori-Abebrese. She's a senior lecturer, the Department of Economics at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Hi, Doc. Good afternoon. Hello, Doc. Can you hear me? It looks like you're muted. I believe you're speaking,
yes,
but I can't
hear sorry.
you. Great. I do hear you now. Thank you very much for your time once again. Were you listening to the finance minister?
I am halfway.
Halfway. Okay, so Joseph, our correspondent, is here to help us. He was on the ground, so he has the details. And he's just been running me through it. 27.4 billion cedis. And he gives me a breakdown. Do you want me to go through the breakdown for you once again?
Okay, I'll be happy if you could do that.
Okay, well, Joseph, there's a part that I missed. I'll just go through what I have here. So we have 7.7 billion for compensation, essentially going into the public sector. We have 1.5. Joseph, is it millions or billion going into goods and services? We have 7 billion going into interest on loans, 259 million into subsidiary, 4.3 billion grants for government agencies, 41 million for social benefits, 813 million. Okay, that's where I missed. Joseph, help me out here so that we can take Doc's perspective on this.
So other expenditure, details of which we are yet to get, will amount to 813 million Ghana cedis.
Okay.
Out of the 27 billion, 1.9 billion will go into capital expenditure, which is again one of the things the minority side is raising concerns over that. A lot of this expected 27 billion is going into consumption instead of capital expenditure. And then amortization, there will be a figure of 3.4 billion that will go into that, apart from the 7 billion that's going into interest payments. And then government will clear certain arrears to the tune of 350 million Ghana cedis.
Okay, so Doc, I want to take your general assessment of what you have heard, and right after that, we will look at the details in the breakdown.
Okay. Thank you, and good afternoon to your viewers. It's not easy after going through the budget, at least from what I've heard from him, from the letter that I saw. In natural fact, looking at the economic conditions around the globe, because of the COVID, it's difficult raising revenue because, you know, many businesses are down now. So I don't know how government is going to raise that money other than, so when he said it's going to raise a 3 billion bond, then I was quite, I said, because that's the way I think he could go. Because looking at how businesses have been turned down, it will be difficult raising revenue. So if you look at the revenues that he intended to raise, he's even as a proposer, so I don't know whether they will really be able to raise that kind of revenue. So
you are looking at the government's ability to raise the revenue it is talking about vis-a-vis what it wants to spend, and you think if we're able to go into, is it I mean, it looks like we're going to go into more borrowing, that will be able to help us. But is borrowing the way to go, especially when we're looking at our debt to GDP ratio, which doesn't look good?
Yes, that's one issue with government. Because if government cannot raise the revenue, because now businesses are not doing well. So apart from the few ones that work in the formal sector that government can raise revenue, the business side, the private sector is not performing well because of the COVID or one or two issues. So if government is not able to raise the revenue, where is going to get the money to spend? Because government, whatever it is, have to spend. Because I'm working for the government, at the end of the month, I'm expecting to pay me. And there are a lot of expenditure that government cannot cut it off, like health, education. It's so essential. We have essential services. So whatever it is, government has to spend. Whether government has revenue or not revenue, government has to spend. So government expenditure does not really depend on the GDP or the incomes that we have in the economy. So he has no choice but to find a means of borrowing so that we'll be able to finance this expenditure. Because some of the expenditure said that he cannot cut it off.
That sounds to me like borrowing at this point is inevitable if you want to throw in COVID and everything else that has come. But let's take a look at the breakdown, and then we'll look at the response that we've had so far, which is when I'll bring my colleague back in, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo. But so you look at the 7.7 billion going into compensation for public sector workers. But then you also look at the 7 billion, almost the same amount, going into interest on loans. That sounds like a lot of waste from my lay perspective. And then, I'm sure there are explanations to it, But then, because if I'm looking as a taxpayer, I'm looking at our balance sheet and I'm thinking we're spending as much as we need to pay public sector workers on servicing loans, I will get worried. But then you also look at 3.5 billion amortization of loans, and I'm wondering, do you understand this? Because I don't.
Okay, don't forget that we are owing so much, because I think just this week, early this week, we were discussing Ghana going into VPAC and those things. We are owing. If you look at our debt GDP ratio, it tells you we are owing. And if you owe, you have to pay interest. And it's not our money. So whatever it is, when you borrow, they tell you you're going to pay this money. Maybe you borrow for 20 years, 10 years. But you don't wait till the 10 years. That's what we call debt servicing. You'll be paying the interest annually. So when the time comes, you have to find money to pay the interest. And look at the amount of money that we owe in. So no matter what, government has to find money to pay the interest. So it's not surprising that they want to raise the bond. Because if they don't raise the bond, I'm wondering where they're going to get the money to pay the interest and also pay compensation and provide other essential services like health, education, and some important services that government cannot cut off.
Yeah. So
it's not surprising that we have that much of 7 billion going into interest payments because we are owing. And some of the monies were raised, the euro bond that we raised, it's foreign currency. So we will have to convert before we can pay those money. So maybe they've captured in all the conversion, and it's a huge amount of money. And they have to pay because it's a contract that you signed, so they have to pay.
They'll have to pay. I want to bring your attention to the reaction we're getting from the minority. Joseph, you say that the minority is saying, if you look at capital expenditure, 1.9 billion is way below the amount, other amount, even 4.3 for the grants and other grants to other government agencies. If you compare what we are giving out in grants and what we are paying for, what we are setting aside for capital expenditure, there's a huge difference. And Joseph, run us through the concerns by the minority on this, on the basis of this.
So that's the point, that in terms of capital expenditure and what will go into real hardcore projects beyond paying compensation and paying loans and all, it's a figure that they think is very much low compared to the 27 billion. So less than 10% of the entire budget for next year is going into real capital expenditure. The clarification you are looking for, Gifty, and I've also been seeking that same clarification on the bit about the money going into interest payments and the money that's going into amortization. And the clarification I'm getting is that the 7 billion is going into the payment of interest, while the 3.4 billion is going into the paying back of the loan specifically over the next 3 months. So if you owe 3 million Ghana cedis and the interest that's built on it is another 1 million, then interest payment bit of it, which is the 7 billion, is going into the payback of the interest, while the 3.4 billion, which is going into amortization, is to pay back the loan itself. So that's what the minority sums up and says when it comes to paying back of loans and all, Ghana will be spending more than 10 billion Ghana cedis out of the 27 billion cedis that we are looking for to spend in the first quarter of next year. John Gina is the MP for Yape Kushegu and also a member of Parliament Finance Committee, goes on to make the point that they are of the view that the economy is broke. That's how come we are seeing some of these situations with a lot of the expenditure going into the paying back of loans. He thinks that the revelation on how we are planning to spend money going into 2021 first quarter is an indication that the economy is not on very solid footing, as the government has repeatedly claimed, and that the economy is broken. He wants the government to admit and hand over power so that then on their side they'll be able to fix it. The minority, Anna Idrisu, also raised a number of concerns about what he thought are expenditures that are very much out of place. He talked about how a lot of the institutions are overspending their budgets and a lot of money is being sunk into campaigning, and went on to talk about how money is being paid to people who don't deserve it. So he cited an example of a firm called McKinsey, which the indication is that they've been providing consultancy services for the Ministry of finance over the last 4 years or so, that he said a lot of money has gone to them that Parliament is unaware of, and they will be probing that very vigorously, and they will be demanding answers on that. So in summary, they think that some of these projections are coming up because of planned wasteful expenditure, which shouldn't be the case going forward. That's why they think power should change hands, or otherwise the economy fails further from their perspective.
I hope that you have a little patience for us, Joseph. I'll come back to you to wrap up for us. But Doc, so just to also wrap up with you, 10.4 billion, if you look at what we have here, and as Joseph has explained, 7, which is for interest, 3.4 billion, which is for amortization of the loans itself, 10.4 billion in all. Out of the 27 billion are all going to service loans. What are your thoughts?
I think for me, I don't see anything wrong with it, honestly.
Okay.
Because if you look at how much we owe in, and don't forget that the debts is not only foreign debt, so the money is not going to only foreigners. We have domestic debts. All those who buy treasury bill bonds related to government, they will be paid. They are also in these interest payments. And the amortization means that maybe government is paying off some of the debts. So if you owe and you are trying to pay some of it, I think it's in the right direction. So even if government is not taking that chunk into what we call the recurrent expenditure, like the compensation, then the better for us. Because I've told you that only for the interest payments, we can't do anything about it. Because if I buy treasury bill, at the end of the day, I expect government to pay me my interest. So government is compelled to spend that one. And it's a good point. If government wants to, it's in the right direction, if government wants to pay off some of the debts, it's good for us. So if government is using almost 10 billion out of the money that the 27 billion that he's asking for to pay loans and then interest, I think it's in the right direction.
It's in the right direction. Is there any, the minority of course don't think so. Is there anything you see on the list that I've just shared with you that jumps at you as alarming, something that we need to pay attention to, apart from the debts that we are piling up?
Apart from the debts that we are piling up, if you look at capital expenditure, I've heard them talking about it, but they shouldn't forget that because of the COVID, the social services have become more important. Look at government trying to sort out people with water bills, electricity bills, and those services. And even this morning, I heard them talking about adding cervical cancer to the health insurance scheme. All of these things are going to be supported by the government. Because of the COVID, it's important because human first. It's important that government adds up to the provision of services so that we are pushing somewhere along the line. Because of the COVID, many people are unemployed. There are a whole lot of social issues that need to be attended to.
Okay.
So if government reduces its capital expenditure at this moment, I will not query him for that. I will not query the government for that because this is what we need for us to live before we look at the capital expenditure.
All right. Doc, I'll say a very big thanks to you for your time. So as far as the Dr. Abebrese is concerned, I mean, this looks good. The capital expenditure, there's no problem with it as far as she's concerned. If you look at the amounts that we've borrowed, there's a necessity to pay. You can't run away from your debt, she says. So it's fine that we're spending about 10.4 billion to pay. But of course, the minority doesn't think so. Doc, I'll say a very big thanks to you. Dr. Ofori-Abebrese is a senior lecturer at the Department of Economics at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Joseph, let me wrap up with you. What else is the minority unhappy about with this budget?
They are unhappy with government's accountability when it comes to various sums that have gone into dealing with the fight against COVID-19. So, for example, the finance minister told Parliament a few hours ago that government has spent about 1.3 billion cedis on the COVID-19 emergency response program, another, to protect lives. Another 1.2 billion cedis has been spent on the coronavirus alleviation program. Another 2 billion Ghana cedis has been spent on what government described as a guarantee scheme so that small, medium enterprises can borrow at a more affordable rate. He indicated that an amount of 3 billion Ghana cedis has actually been spent as credit and stimulus package by various commercial banks to revitalize the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the hospitality sector and all. And he went on to disclose that government has offered strategic support in income increases and life insurance in excess of 320 million Ghana cedis. And as well, and get to this another interesting part that is being flagged by those who've been responding, that government has spent 1.3 billion Ghana cedis supporting households and businesses with electricity and water subsidies, over the last month or so. And then additionally, another 1.8 million has been spent on providing cooked food for businesses and all. And for the minority, they think that all of these figures which you put together, they are not seeing evidence of it impacting the lives of ordinary Ghanaians, which is how come they think that expenditure over the last few months has actually been out of place. Two quick things to highlight. Of the 27 billion, the government projection is that total revenue and grants will amount to just 13 billion, and the rest of it is money that they need to look for elsewhere, which again, the minority is making the point that that is not prudent use of the various taxpayer money and all. But in summary, for the records, all of this could be out in, not exactly implemented, or could be changed one way or the other, depending on what happens on December 7th. Because as has been described, this is an expenditure in advance of appropriation. So what we are expecting is that whoever becomes the next finance minister, whether it's Ofori-Abebrese or someone else in the NPP or someone in the NDC or someone from any of the minority parties, in March next year, he will come to Parliament with the proper 2021 budget for the necessary approval. And so all the revision can be done, and the targets could be changed. Maybe the plans to go onto the bond market could be revised and all. This is a projection to meet the statutory requirements. And even right after December 7th, specifically January 7th, when a new president or an old president continues to run affairs, and probably a new and an old finance minister takes over, he could review what the monies can be spent on, as long as he's maintaining it within the ceiling of the 27 billion that the House is approving. So all of this remains plans that could change depending on what happens on December 7th.
And Joseph, you put it so well together, and it gives us a very good appreciation of the issues. But before I let you go, there weren't any heckling in Parliament today. I didn't quite hear of any.
In fact, there weren't a lot of members of Parliament on the floor.
Okay.
People
are campaigning.
Well, everyone is campaigning. Everyone is including, very key members on the Finance Committee, who are probably people who are paying more attention to this. The committee, we gather, is meeting this afternoon on this, after which they will then come back with a report to the floor.
I guess for the minority, it's a matter of they know that it will go through anyway, because the government has a majority in Parliament. So, well, what's the point in coming in to debate something that's already, whose outcome is already decided, so to speak?
Exactly. And the indication is that a lot of MPs have also been out there campaigning with the various presidential candidates, which is how come of them didn't show up. So heckling, not virtually none of it, until when the whole proceeding came to an end. And a lot of the minority MPs were asking the finance minister, what's the name of this budget? And then some of them used very interesting words, including a retrogression budget, to describe it and all. But the more interesting thing was how this presentation, for example, started around 1:40 this afternoon, lasted for about 40 minutes. In fact, at a point in time, as the House was dealing with other businesses, including the reports of the Land Ministry and the Land Commission, their audit reports, their audit performance reports, the minority that asked the whereabouts of the finance minister, and that everyone has been waiting for a long time. And then eventually he showed up to present this. And so we're waiting to see the House debate this over the next 8 days or so before they take their break, most likely on the 6th of November, before which they would have approved this request that's come from the finance minister.
Some will say we know what to expect, but we wait to see how it all goes. Joseph, thank you. Thank you very much. Joseph Opoku-Gakpo is our parliamentary affairs correspondent, and he puts it very beautifully together, gives you the perspective, and gives you the thought-provoking part as well that comes up on the floor of Parliament. This is still The Pulse with me, Gifty, and